In the autumn of 2004, the quiet rhythm of Ashley Graham's life shattered without warning. On her return from classes at the University of Massachusetts, she vanished, taken by Jack Krauser with a precision that suggested long preparation and inside knowledge. How he spirited her across the Atlantic remains unclear. Someone within the Secret Service had been feeding Krauser information, guiding him through security protocols meant to be impenetrable. The response inside Washington was immediate. Every agent assigned to Ashley Graham's protection was placed under investigation. Containing the leak can prevent further compromise. The government locked down the incident as a state secret. Even those tasked with finding her were kept in the dark. Meanwhile, far from home, the Los Iluminados had no intention of ransoming the president's daughter, or using her as a simple hostage. Instead, Ashley was to serve as a seed of something far more insidious. They planned to implant a plaga inside her, along with several dormant eggs, and then return her to the United States. Once home, she would unknowingly become the vector of a silent takeover, spreading the parasites to congressmen, judges, and military leaders. Through her, the cult intended to infiltrate the upper structure of American power, placing the nation under Sadler's unseen command. A single disappearance was all it took to set their plan in motion. Not long after Ashley Graham's disappearance, fragments of intelligence began to surface from American operatives stationed across Europe. One report, vague but credible, placed her somewhere in northern Spain. The name tied to that area surfaced repeatedly in intercepted chatter. Los Iluminados. Almost nothing was known about the group, only that it existed in the shadows and carried a reputation that unsettled even Spain's most seasoned authorities. If Ashley had been indeed taken to the mountains, she was likely in the hands of an undeclared terrorist organization, one whose motives remained entirely unknown. With the cooperation of the Spanish government, preliminary plans were drafted to search the region, though whether Spain's leadership fully understood the gravity of the situation remained unclear. Back in Washington, the investigation into the Secret Service leak throttled any plan for a large-scale rescue. Every agent was under scrutiny. Every channel of communication was a suspect. A rapid deployment would risk tipping off the very mole they were desperate to expose. And so, faced with impossible constraints, President Graham authorized a smaller, more surgical operation. Only one man will go in. Leon S. Kennedy, a federal agent with the first-hand experience in biological contamination, was selected to infiltrate the region alone. His support would be an extraction helicopter on standby, and limited coordination from Spain's national police, whose officers would serve as interpreters and maintain the illusion of a routine investigation. Los Iluminados' scheme depended on precision. Ashley Graham needed to remain in their custody long enough for the plaga within to take hold. Any disruption, stray encounter, or premature escape could unravel everything they set in motion. The first fracture in their plan came from within. Luis Sera, once a trusted researcher, quietly brokered his own escape. His price was steep, a stolen dominant plaga sample, the cult's most coveted asset. When his absence was discovered, suspicion spread like wildfire, and Sierra's betrayal was laid bare. Realizing he could no longer flee, he hid the sample as his final act of defiance, before capture became unavoidable. Because Sierra alone knew where he had concealed it, the Los Iluminados could not simply dispose of him. For now, his life was useful. He was dragged away to a weather-beaten hamlet north of the village center, and left in a crumbling shack to await investigation. The second Black Swan arrived in the form of Leon S. Kennedy. Both the United States and Spain had become aware, at least in fragments. Their suspicions culminated in the deployment of an American agent, long before the cult was prepared to counter him. Their spies in Madrid sent warnings ahead of his arrival. Yet even with this knowledge in hand, Chief Menendez found himself without necessary measures to prevent the intrusion. Kennedy's descent into the territory came with 2 CMP officers assigned as interpreters. They were taken almost immediately, silenced before they could raise an alarm. But Kennedy slipped through the cult's tightening grasp. Kennedy's survival fractured the delicate timing of Los Iluminados' plans. The third Black Swan arrived in the form of Ada Wong. She came expecting a covert exchange with Luis Sierra, but instead found the village drowning in disorder. The plaga research he had entrusted to her had given her a sharp understanding of their biology, sharp enough to manipulate it. With the calculated strike, Wong rang the church bell, exploiting the parasite's conditioned response and sending the villagers shambling towards the sound. But Sierra himself was nowhere to be found. By chance, a kind of cruel symmetry, Kennedy's own investigation pulled him towards the same hamlet where Sierra had been last seen. It was there that Menendez cornered him. Wong arrived only in time to watch Kennedy and Sierra taken elsewhere, spirited away before she could intervene. Sadler, seeing an unexpected promise in Kennedy, forbade his immediate death. A living agent, conditioned into a ganado, might serve the cult far more effectively than a corpse, especially if Wong attempted a rescue. With this in mind, Saller ordered both captives held within a fortified stronghold until their transformation could be secured. But foresight alone could not compensate for Menendez's militia. While Kennedy and Sera lay bound and injured, the very first ganado Kennedy had fought at the village outskirts, somehow still alive, dragged himself into the fort, intent on finishing the mission he had begun. In this moment of unintended opportunity, Kennedy and Sera wrestled themselves free, overpowered their attacker, and slipped out of the stronghold before the cult could react. Through Sera, Kennedy learned of Ashley Graham's imprisonment within the church, the heart of the cult's territory. Armed with that knowledge, Kennedy forced a bloody path towards the village, systematically dismantling the militia stationed to contain him. Menendez intercepted him before he could reach the church, yet even his victory proved hollow. Bound by Saller's orders and the plaga developing inside Kennedy, Menendez refrained from killing him outright, settling instead for a brutal display of dominance meant to break his will. The violence, however, triggered the intervention Wong had been preparing for. Her attempt to maneuver within the chaos led instead to her capture, and she was condemned for a sacrificial ritual. But Kennedy remained alive. Menendez started to accept a new reality. Kennedy was likely to reach Graham unless stopped. To delay him, he unleashed the lake's guardian, Del Lago, a grotesque salamander warped by mutation. Kennedy fought the creature from the deck of a battered boat, eventually destroying it. As the water stilled, agony surged through his veins, an unmistakable signal of the plaga's tightening hold. Moments later, he collapsed into darkness. As night settled over the valley, Los Iluminados' leadership shifted into crisis mode. The chains of failures throughout the day forced him to reconsider every assumption. And by dusk, the cult had been implementing a series of desperate contingency plans. The first priority was preventing any possibility of an aerial extraction, expecting that the United States would attempt a helicopter rescue once Graham's location had become known. The cult redirected its forces to the northern perimeter. There, under the looming cliffs, they erected a blockade designed to halt Kennedy's advance and trap him in a kill zone. Ganados patrols were ordered to close in from multiple angles once Kennedy and Graham were pinned down. 2 El Gantes, massive, barely restrained bioweapons, were assigned as living barricades, to be unleashed only if human forces faltered. Overwatch for this operation fell to Krauser, who monitored radio channels deep into the night, listening for any sign of rotor blades cutting through the air. His elite paramilitary unit had standing orders. Any helicopter appearing over the mountains was to be shot down before it could reach the village. Meanwhile, the leadership turned its attention to Sera. His escape or rescue could jeopardize their entire operation. And so Wong, captured earlier after her failed infiltration, was chosen as the next sacrificial offering. She was taken to a cavern lit by firelight and prepared for ritual execution. Yet even under guard, she managed to slip free into the darkness. 6 hours after the brutal struggle against Del Lago, Kennedy regained consciousness inside a weathered lakeside shack. Moving with sharpened purpose, he cut down the first ganado that crossed his path and forced his way towards the church. There, behind iron bars and old stone, he finally reached Ashley Graham. The reunion triggered the alert that the U.S. military had been waiting for. A rescue helicopter sped toward the village, only to be obliterated the moment it crossed into Los Iluminados territory. Saller allowed the pair to flee the church, confident that the plaga within them would do the work violence could not. Guided northward by the circumstance and desperation, Kennedy and Graham reached a small cabin in the forest, just as the enemy mobilized behind them. Inside, they encountered Sera, who had taken refuge there after slipping through the cult's tightening net. As the Americans continued to push their way through the blockade, barricades of bodies and burning timber rising in every direction, Sera seized a moment to make contact with Wong. The shared goal forced him deeper into hostile ground, searching for the hidden sample he had stolen and concealed before his capture. Its recovery meant his escape, and perhaps the survival of everyone else still resisting the cult's control. But with each unexpected development, Los Iluminados' contingency plans frayed further. Menendez and his followers grew increasingly fearful, not only of Kennedy's progress, but of the consequences for Salazar's forces, should the Americans reach the castle. Menendez sealed the massive stone gate leading to the castle bridge, hoping to trap Kennedy within the village's borders. He then retreated to the abattoir, an isolated slaughterhouse reeking of blood, intent on ambushing the intruder himself. Their confrontation ignited the building around them. Flames raced out the support beams as Menendez, wounded and cornered, surrendered his human form to the plaga's influence. His body convulsed and split, and reshaped itself into the towering arachnid horror. Yet the mutation brought him no victory. Kennedy fought through the inferno until the creature collapsed, its remains consumed by the fire. When the smoke finally cleared, Kennedy and Graham had only one direction left to go. With the village burning behind them, and no safe ground ahead, they fled eastward across the ravine, and into the looming stone fortress of Salazar's castle. Shadows flickered across battlements as monks, soldiers, and unseen watchers repositioned themselves, each faction maneuvering for advantage within the cult's hierarchy. Kennedy and Graham used the darkness to their advantage, slipping through the old stone passages in search of safety. A brief respite allowed Kennedy's parasite to churn again beneath his ribs, its whispers growing bolder with each hour. Sera, understanding the urgency better than anyone, chose not to flee with Wong when escape briefly presented itself. His knowledge of the Plaga's progression and the Americans' inevitable deterioration kept him anchored. By delaying his own rescue, he provided the pair with anticonvulsants, and in doing so almost certainly alerted Wong to an increasingly fragile state of their mission. Unlike the late village chief, Salazar possessed a more methodical and cruel tactical mind. His defenses had been devised long before Kennedy ever set foot on Spanish soil. Perhaps some mechanical, some biological, all lethal, littered the halls. Their effectiveness had been refined through repeated tests on enslaved monks who had served him, their failures adding to the castle's growing legacy of blood. Every spring-loading mechanism, every corridor lined with death existed to prolong the suffering of intruders, rather than simply extinguish them. To choke off any outside influence, Krauser and Salazar coordinated another stroke of control. They flooded the military communication channels with interference. The airwaves, Kennedy's final threat to the outside world, fell silent under a blanket of encrypted static. Shortly after stepping into the corridors of Salazar's castle, Kennedy and Graham found themselves face to face with the young Castellan himself. Salazar regarded the true intruders as pieces on the chessboard. He presented Kennedy with an ultimatum: either relinquish the girl into his custody, or fall to the castle's defenses and have her seized regardless. Despite the power at his command, Salazar did not unleash his Vertigo bodyguards. Their strength alone could have ended the ordeal in seconds. But the Castellan preferred a more theoretical outcome. With a smile that carried centuries of arrogance, he allowed the pair to continue deeper into his domain. The prospect of watching Kennedy struggle through designs crafted from cruelty and genius appealed to him more than any swift execution. His indulgence soon paid off. Within the monk's shrine, a revolving door mechanism snapped shut between them. Graham was swept away into the castle's interior, while Kennedy was left alone in an ever-worsening labyrinth. His pursuit forced him through the depths of the fortress, each step an escalation in danger. In the lower reaches, where the air hung thick with decay, he navigated dungeons claimed by the novicidors, invisible predators that stalked him from walls and ceilings alike. From there, Salazar orchestrated an elaborate ambush. Robed monks armed with machine guns, rocket launchers, and unwavering fanaticism converged on Kennedy. He fought through them only to emerge into the castle's garden maze. Thick hedges blocked the moonlight, and twisted paths hid far worse threats. There among the rustling weaves and winding corridors, Salazar's Carmelitos crawled, feral beasts warped by Plaga, their snarls echoing through the maze as Kennedy pushed deeper in his relentless pursuit of a lost girl. Eventually, it brought him to the far end of the garden maze, where Ada and Wong was. Each knew the other too well from the ruins of Raccoon City. Without a word exchanged, they chose the narrow path between rivalry and necessity, neither ally nor enemy. Wong's allegiance, tied by the invisible thread to Wesker, came with orders. Should the moment arise, Kenny was to be eliminated. Yet her choice to spare him here quietly unraveled that directive. Soon after, the swirling tensions within the castle drew all major players into a single concourse. Graham was held captive at its center, her restraints watched by armored guardians. It was here that Sierra and Wong had planned to enact a delicate exchange of stolen dominant Plaga sample, a transaction poised to shift the balance of power. But Sadler struck first. His parasite's massive tail lashed out, piercing Sierra before the man could flee. The sample slipped from Sierra's lifeless grasp and into Sadler's possession. Wong witnessed the killing blow from above, but found herself paralyzed by circumstance. The moment demanded intervention, yet Kennedy's presence, combined with the lifted order to eliminate him, made any move towards the sample impossible. Meanwhile, Graham was forced to fight her own battle. Separated from Kennedy, she found herself facing suits of armor, animated by the Plaga, with nothing but desperation to guide her. She maneuvered through their assaults until she could break free of the chamber's horrors. Salazar's frustration grew into a desperate fixation. Every failed attempt to stop Kennedy drove him deeper into cruelty. And soon his concern for Graham's usefulness faded beneath his thirst to see the intruder destroyed. What little restraint he had began to crumble, revealing the full extent of his sadism. As Kennedy and Graham pressed further into the northern reaches of the castle, Salazar positioned himself alone. He lured the pair into the chamber, where the ceiling lurched downward. Escaping that trap only funneled them into a narrow corridor lined with rails, where a custom-built killing machine towered forward. Not long after, the two Americans triggered an ancient mechanism hidden deep within the armory door. A dozen armored suits, animated by Plaga, lurched awake, surrounding them in one more attempt on their life. Every encounter made it clear, only Kennedy's death mattered. Their menace reached its peak when they entered the castle's grand ballroom. The Novistadors had built a sprawling nest. In this dangerous enclosure, Graham was finally overwhelmed. The creature seized her and carried her off, delivering her to Salazar's throne room, where she would be displayed as bait for Kennedy's confrontation. When Kennedy finally arrived there, he found himself standing on a concealed trapdoor, an execution device Salazar had used many times on slaves and dissidents. The floor vanished beneath him, and he dropped into the depths below. By chance or sheer endurance, he survived the fall, leaving Salazar's increasingly reckless schemes still fruitless. The chase, however, was far from over. Word of Salazar's repeated failures had reached the leadership, and Krauser, ever the pragmatist, received new orders. He was to retrieve Graham himself and transfer her to the island. Salazar's authority was slipping, and the cult's patience with him had run thin. In desperation, Salazar dispatched one of his Vertigo to stalk and kill Kennedy. The attempt failed, and with this failure, the spiral of collapsing control accelerated. Meanwhile, Graham was escorted to the Queen Plaga's tower, where preparations for her ritual induction began. Here she was simply formally welcomed as a disciple of Los Iluminados. It was the culmination of the cult's ambitions. All that remained was time. Kennedy's pursuit forced him through the underbelly of Salazar's castle, where enslaved villagers labored in dim caverns. Their task was grim: excavate ancient Plaga remnants sealed away by civilizations long vanished. Past these mines, Kennedy pushed onward, ascending on an elevator towards a church that would lead directly to the ritual tower. But Salazar, eager to remain in control in any way he could, had prepared another trap. As Kennedy approached the bridge, a colossal mechanical effigy of Salazar lurched to life, pursuing him across the span until the structure collapsed under its own weight, plunging into the abyss below. When Kennedy at last reached the ritual tower, Salazar and the remaining Vertigo stood waiting. Waves of monks were sent to halt the intruder's ascent as the ceremony neared its completion. The ritual succeeded. Graham, now a vessel for the cult's ambitions, was handed off to Krauser for immediate evacuation. Salazar remained behind, fanatically resolved to offer himself to the Queen Plaga as his final act of devotion. The battle that followed consumed both him and the monstrous parasite that anchored the cult's biological power. With the death of Salazar, the destruction of the Queen Plaga, and the collapse of their only means of natural mass-producing plagas, Los Iluminados suffered a blow of which they could never recover. With Salazar dead and the castle silenced, the focus of every surviving faction shifted towards Sadler's island fortress, the final fortified heart of Los Iluminados. Wong, understanding the next phase of her mission required subtlety rather than confrontation, positioned herself in the shadows of the castle boathouse, waiting for Kennedy to arrive. Together they crossed the moonlight lake in a quiet, uneasy partnership. Sadler, anticipating interference, had already mobilized his militia. But the early hours worked in their adversary's favor. Kennedy landed on the island, undetected. Finding a facility gate, Kennedy forced his way inside and descended into the cold, sterile labyrinth of Los Iluminados laboratories. There among the steel corridors and flickering lights, Kennedy carved a path through the horrors and reached the cell where Graham had been confined. Kennedy found the waste system chute and plunged with Graham into the industrial depths below. What awaited them beneath the island was a catastrophic maze of concrete machinery and tunnels carved like honeycomb through the earth. To break free, the pair commandeered a bulldozer. The escape was loud, too loud, and the fortress quickly mapped their path by sound alone. Sadler, aware of their movements, prepared a counter-assault. As dawn threatened the horizon, the bulldozer burst from the tunnels and onto the eastern cliffs, only to be driven violently off the road by forces lying in wait, forcing Kennedy and Graham to stagger into the open air and regain their footing. Here, Sadler made his move. With a single command through their shared biological tether, he seized control of Graham's body. Her movements shifted, no longer her own, and she stepped willingly into the hands of the cultists. Kennedy was left alone. Elsewhere on the island, Wong was speaking to Krauser. The two operatives, bound by secrecy yet divided by ambition, waited for Wesker's next directive. The dominant plaga had not been recovered from the labs as anticipated. Sadler still held it. Krauser understood immediately what this meant for him. His role was slipping out of alignment, and the mission, already fraying at the edges, could no longer endure further delay. The militia scattered and losing cohesion. Kennedy's usefulness was deemed spent. The agent was not a liability. It had to be eliminated before he could complete the extraction of the sample. Krauser moved to carry out the directive, and Wong, orders to support the operation, began her own pursuit, taking the underground tunnels in an attempt to intersect Kennedy's plan. But the island revealed new secrets at every turn. She soon found herself passing through a hidden naval dockyard, the cavernous space housing a massive battleship, rendered useless by damage and neglect. The detour cost her precious time. By the time she reached the surface again, the confrontation she had been sent to prevent was already underway. Krauser and Kennedy clashed steel to steel in a brutal knife fight atop a rusted platform. Wong arrived too late to intervene, and Krauser, sensing her presence, disengaged and vanished into the northern reaches of the island. He retreated into the ruins of Sadler's ancient fortresses, a crumbling relic repurposed into a lethal gauntlet. There Krauser prepared the battlefield, wiring old stonework with explosives to ensure Kennedy's pursuit would end in ashes. Their duel resumed amid the shattered battlements and lantern-lit towers. Under the strain of plaga within him, Krauser's body contorted and mutated, his left arm splitting into a monstrous weapon. The transformation amplified his strength, but even this was not enough. Kennedy ultimately overpowered him and escaped the fortress just before the charges detonated. Krauser lived through the blast, his body battered but unbroken. He regrouped with a squad of fighters, men loyal to him, unified by their shared desire for vengeance. It was this team that he led against Wong in the final attempt to regain control of the mission. But the encounter marked the end of his campaign. For all his enhancements and all his fury, Krauser was defeated at last, his ambitions consumed in the shadow of a larger design. Wong, having already reported him killed in action, received new instruction for Wesker. Allow Kennedy to eliminate Sadler, if opportunity permitted, then dispose of him afterward. As the first edge of dawn crept over the island, the U.S. military initiated a second, desperate attempt to recover Kennedy and Graham. Though radio jamming still severed all communication with him, analysts at headquarters managed to pinpoint his exact location. A modified Bell UH-1 gunship swept over the eastern islands, unleashing a barrage that tore through the last of Sadler's outward defenses. The helicopter attack exposed his position instantly. Sadler, unwilling to risk further disruption to his plans, dispatched a strike team. The aircraft was struck down in moments, spiraling into the rocks below. The pilot died before the wreckage ever settled. A rising column of smoke, signaling the cost of failed rescue. With Los Iluminados broken and the remaining fighters scattered across the island, Sera withdrew to the encapsulation laboratory on the northern shore. Here among the grim machinery designed to nurture and awaken the plaga, he kept Graham under guard and prepared a final trap for Kennedy. He expected the American agent to come alone, exhausted, but the plan unraveled before it began. Wong reached the facility first. She delayed Sadler long enough for Kennedy to extract Graham, pushing the two toward an abandoned operating theater, where the ancient parasite removal equipment still humble residual power. Wong's interference, however, cost her freedom. Sadler's zealous overwhelmed her and delivered her back to the master as a prize. Sadler, aware that Graham was slipping out of reach, abandoned the subtlety that defined his earlier operations. He summoned what remained of his militia and consolidated them at a half-finished construction site not far from the shoreline. Wong was bound and suspended from a crane high above the rubble, her helpless form serving as bait, a lure designed to draw Kennedy into one final confrontation. The plan depended on Kennedy still being vulnerable to plaga manipulation, but the surgical purge had severed Sadler's influence, and the young agent arrived immune to the mental chains the cult leader expected to tighten around him. The battlefield collapsed into chaos. Stripped of options and losing control of the situation, Sadler surrendered to the plaga within him. His body twisted, ruptured, and expanded as the parasite forced itself outward, reshaping him into a monstrous form. The mutated Sadler descended upon Kennedy with overwhelming force, tearing through machinery and shattering supports as the two clashed. Wong, having neutralized the last of the militia, seized the opportunity to retrieve a discarded rocket launcher from the edge of the site. She hurled the weapon towards Kennedy, just as Sadler advanced for the killing blow. In the rising dust and fractured light of the construction yard, Kennedy armed the launcher and fired. The warhead struck Sadler's core, engulfing the abomination in fire, tearing the parasite from within. When the flames subdued, nothing remained of the cult leader but fragments of the creature he had become. Sadler's destruction marked the quiet end of an uneasy alliance between Kennedy and Wong. With the cult leader dead and balance shifted, Wong's true employers ascended onto the collapsing island, their focus fixed solely on reclaiming the dominant Plaga. Mission already compromised by shifting loyalties now required a final decision. Her standing orders were to eliminate Kennedy, but she chose a different path. In the days prior, she had seeded the island with demolition charges, each carefully positioned to eliminate Los Iluminados research network and prevent the resurgence of a parasite empire. Once triggered, the cascading explosions would tear through the labs, bunkers, and tunnels, sealing the cult's secrets beneath ash and water. Anyone left on the island would be consumed by destruction, Kennedy included. Knowing the violence her preparations would unleash, Wong arranged for a jet ski to be smuggled to the island, a contingency meant not for herself, but for the agents she could not bring herself to eliminate. As the detonations rippled across the island, she made her final move, slipping the key into Kennedy's reach and vanishing before he could register the gesture. With the ground erupting beneath their feet and fire lighting the shore, Kennedy and Graham raced towards the water. The jet ski roared to life as the labs behind them collapsed into a pillar of debris and flame. The two sped across the churning waves, narrowly outrunning the shock waves that chased them across the surface. Only once they reached the distant coastline did the full weight of their escape settle over them. From there, they contacted their superiors, arranging extraction as the burning island smoldered on the horizon, carrying with it the remains of Sadler's empire and the last echoes of Los Iluminados.